Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about sleep, in particular insomnia. And so, I'm going to start out kind of from, the most practical, going to the most esoteric or spiritual. But this will start to answer the question of what insomnia means from a spiritual level, and offer a few tools in case you're somebody who experiences insomnia or sleep difficulty. So, from a very practical level, I will say that some people have sleep difficulty, including insomnia, because of either nutritional deficiencies, so dietary issues, as well as just kind of basic things like magnesium deficiency. So, a lot of us experience things like magnesium deficiency or poor diet that are contributing to our sleep, as well as very practical things like, drinking caffeine after noon and stuff like that. If you are having difficulty with sleep, that would be something to look at from a purely practical standpoint. I will also mention from kind of a practical or medical standpoint that things like experiencing thyroid difficulties or iron deficiency anemia, those can be contributing factors as well as women who are perimenopausal or menopausal can experience hormonal shifts uh, that disrupt sleep or lead to lack of good sleep. I will mention as well as my last practical thing is that some people who have difficulty sleeping are experiencing sleep apnea, basically where they stop breathing or have difficulty breathing during sleep, which leads to a lot of waking up and snoring and sleep difficulty of all kinds. Now let's start talking about energetic and emotional reasons for insomnia. Energetically, in Chinese medicine, there is a clock in which every hour or every couple of hours of the day is paired with a particular organ. And so, what that means in Chinese medicine and acupuncture is that somebody who is having difficulty going to sleep versus somebody who is having difficulty staying asleep versus somebody who regularly wakes up at 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. Those are going to have different imbalances energetically, in terms of Chinese medicine. And so the thought can be, if I were to talk simply about things, is that in order to have good sleep in Chinese medicine, we need to have enough blood and qi, energy flowing through our system. But if we are looking towards insomnia, it almost always has to do in Chinese medicine with the liver or the heart and the state of the spirit or Shen in Chinese medicine. And so, what this means is that somebody who is experiencing quite a bit of emotional turbulence, for example, anger or just a lot of thoughts, and emotions that they are not able to sort of process or make room for during the day, they are going to be the type of person to either have difficulty going to sleep or have difficulty staying asleep. And so, if you are in that category, a good simple thing to do is to start, a practice of journaling, start a practice of meditation, start a practice in some way to get your emotions and thoughts out. Art, dance, yoga, whatever your thing is, so that all of those energies can flow out as much as possible so they aren't sort of lingering when you're trying to go to sleep. Part of the reason that they arise when we are trying to go to sleep is because we have space and quiet for them. not only in our own household on an individual level, things are quiet, but also during night, everybody else tends to be a little bit more quiet. And we are also approaching yin times of the clock, yin energies. So basically, lunar, feminine, dark energies versus our daytime, which is yang, sunlight, doing type of energies. And so many people have difficulties with sleep because they go into that lunar cycle, which begins around 9 p.m. or so. And we start easing out of it around 3 or 4 a.m. or so. And that is because their young self, our daytime self, has not settled or gotten to a point where we can process or work through our emotions and thoughts. And so, what's going to happen? We have a period of peace, we have a period of stillness, we have those lunar qualities coming through that yin portion of our days. And so, all of those are going to start coming up for us to attempt to deal with. So, if we are successful in working with those throughout the day, carving out experiences of peace and stillness for ourselves during the day, we will find that our night times are less filled with kind of emotions and thoughts. The other thing that I will mention is that, especially in the category for people who might start to get sleepy, but then wake up and experience insomnia, either waking up many times a night, or they notice with the sleep cycle that they're starting to, go into sleep, go through that sleep cycle, but are waking up many times a night. That has to do energetically and in Chinese medicine with the state of qi and blood. And basically, what that means is that um, people in that category tend to be quite depleted. In simpler terms, they tend to be exhausted. Their vital energy, their body, their mind, their spirit is experiencing exhaustion. And so it seems odd that we may get so exhausted that we can't sleep, because the natural thought to this is that, oh, if you're exhausted, you should sleep, or maybe even sleep more. But what happens with our nervous system, what happens with our energy, is that if we deplete anything too much, we start to go into its opposite. And so, what that means is that if we deplete our energy too much, what's going to happen is that yang energy, or kind of nervous system energy that feels unsettled, ill at ease, sort of, kind of ramped up, where we can't feel that sense of being settled down, where we can't feel that sense of like even being tired anymore, will start to come in and be a part of our reality. And so, I'm not one of those people that's like meditation is the answer to everything here, because people who are experiencing exhaustion to that level, what can be really helpful for them is finding a competent herbalist. Herbalists know some of the, and I speak about this as an herbalist myself, that herbalists know some of the best remedies for sleep. I will say that for some people, visiting a doctor, getting blood work, and that sort of stuff can be helpful and can be their path. And so I'm never a type of person that's like, don't take whatever your doctor prescribes for you. But a lot of people do not realize that herbalists have success in a lot of different areas. And one of the areas that they have the most amount of resources in, the most tools in, is being able to kind of look at your individual situation and prescribe herbs for sleep, for bolstering your energy system to get to the point where it's able to relax. It's able to let go a little bit so it can kind of go into sleep practices. So it basically can get some sleep. And so beyond that, if you don't have that resource around you, if you don't want to do any of that, again, carving out some time of your day, some time of your life that is not centered on doing is incredibly helpful. We are so used to doing, and that includes in our sort of switch off times, what we are doing is activities of numbness rather than activities where we are able to relax and get to a state of relaxation with our nervous system. For example, going on social media and going on news sites, those are exciting to our nervous system, even if we are looking at goofy Instagram reels or something like that. Music can also be a wonderful thing. It really depends on the person, some of the kind of beats and ASMR and all that sort of stuff that's out there just annoys me, but for some people, it is exactly the ticket for them to start to get their system to a state where it can take that edge off and start to go to sleep a bit better. And so I'll talk about one more pattern in terms of Chinese medicine, and that is people who tend to wake up early. They're able to get to sleep, but they wake up at 3 a.m., they wake up at 5 a.m., and this has to do with the transition of that clock. And so I mentioned that every hour, every couple of hours is paired with a particular organ on that clock. And so if we are talking about the 3 to 5 a.m. time, we are talking about overall the transition from yin, so lunar time, so dark time, going into the onset of yang. That is not only true for kind of the sky outside where daylight starts to peak in 5, 6, 7 a.m., but it is also true for our own internal daylight, our own internal yin moon turning over to sun. And so some people, it is often a pattern when people are waking up early that they have some form of what is known as yin deficiency. Basically, their moon energies, their lunar energies, the parts of themselves that are feminine, polarity, that are watery, that are flowing, that are still, that are embodied, those things are lacking. And so again, herbalism is really wonderful for this, but there can also be anything from very spiritual remedies to very practical ones. For example, I suggest people who are out of touch with their own inner lunar self to do things like go outside and observe the moon, kind of bathe in moonlight, to drink more water and consciously when you're drinking water to say, this is nourishing my inner lunar qualities, my inner feminine, that sort of thing. And also, a lot of people have to look at how they live their lives. We are a very focused culture on doing, on performing, on that masculine sort of hustle grind sort of culture. And so there can be, again, a real question of if there is time for non-doing, if there is a time for simply sitting there and staring out the window, if there is time for when it gets nice outside, simply sitting in nature, if there is time for eating without looking at the television, without looking at your phone, all of these things are very bolstering for for the yin energies of our body, and they can make a considerable difference. So let's talk about the more spiritual or esoteric nature of insomnia and sleep. I will again start kind of with the Chinese medicine thought of things, which is that sleep almost always has to do with the state of our Shen, with the state of our spirit, our soul. It is, I'm pointing here because it very much has to do with heart energies in Chinese medicine. And so this maybe bring up questions such as, are you living in an authentic life? Are you doing what would give your soul nourishment? This can be creative pursuits, but it can also be just a consideration of who you are and what your essence is, who you truly are in that deep spiritual level, and bringing that forward in some way. And so this can be kind of a consideration of, okay, are you somebody who tends to be more invisible or shut down or feels like you cannot express yourself to others? Is there a part of you that is blocking you from energetically, spiritually sort of showing up on a deeper spiritual level? There can be a consideration with the Shen of the spirit and soul of how you feel about being incarnated here. This is one of those deep spiritual questions, but it can show up with an imbalance of sleep, with insomnia issues, because that is the time of the soul. It is the yin time. It is the time for the parts of ourselves that can really open up, can really expand spiritually to do so. And so, if we are in a place in our daily lives where we cannot show up spiritually, energetically, emotionally for any reason, this will show up in our sleep or sleep disruption, which can also include people having intense, crazy dreams as well, which is showing a lot of spiritual activity um, at nighttime because it can't necessarily come out in the day for a lot of reasons. So, in Chinese medicine, I will mention that there are varying considered spirits in the body. The Shen is considered kind of the highest, kind of the true, authentic aspect of our soul. I always like the description that if our heart is at peace, if our heart is in a state of balance, that it's sort of like a calm river in that place. And most of us do not have a calm river. We have a typhoon, we have a whirlpool, we have a place that has been guarded and armored up. And so it can be a question of energetically and spiritually, what is preventing your heart from having flow? What is preventing your heart chakra from opening and flowing? And for some people, it may be energetic depletion, and for other people, it may be that they have sort of walled themselves off in that area because they feel too sensitive for the world, because they've been hurt by others, um, because they were not appropriately loved and cared for as children, and so what happens when we experience that is that we close off our hearts. We can no longer um, love others, or it's more difficult for us to sort of shine forward that love and care from our hearts. Another spirit I will mention though is the Hun, Hun. It has to do with the liver. And what I will share about this is that this is the spirit of our physical bodies. And so, what can happen to some people on a complex spiritual level is that this spirit is the one that goes out at night. It is the one that goes into dream realms, into the underworld. I will chat about this next. Um, and so, what can happen on a complex spiritual level with sleep is that there is some discord between the physical body and the soul. And this almost always has to do on a spiritual level with a conflict between living and dying, with fears around death and dying. I'll go into this more in a moment, and with a feeling of being trapped, a feeling of not wanting to be a part of the body, a part of the life. And so what happens in those scenarios is that there is a conflict between the incarnated body, the physical manifest body, and the soul. Because the soul wants to express itself through the body. It wants to be friends with the physical body, but we may have a lot of conflict and reasons for that conflict about why we do not wish to be incarnated here, why we do not wish to be embodied, and a lot of understandable fears around death and dying. So let's get even more esoteric than that. I love in the Greek myths that Thanatos and Hypnos are brothers. And so Hypnos is the god of sleep, Thanatos of death. And so, on a spiritual level, the thought of what is happening as we sleep is that an aspect of our soul journeys into the underworld. And so, what this means is that some of us may be more conscious of this than others. For example, some of us who may be more shamanically inclined may have dreams that play out like movies, or may have experiences of other lives, of other dimensions, of even spirit families, spirit spouses. All sorts of stuff can get really crazy. In terms of, kind of sleep and the sort of areas it can bring us to. There are more superficial areas it can lead us to. Some of us may have dreams working through emotions, or some of us may have dreams just simply because we watched a television show and then all of a sudden we're dreaming about, Top Chef, or, a reality show or something like that. Our brain, seeks to release kind of all of and process all the stuff we've experienced in our days. But on that deep spiritual level, our soul, or an aspect of our soul, is journeying at night through death, through the death realms, through the underworld. And there is a lot of beautiful information that can be garnered there about what is really troubling us, about themes in our lives, all of that sort of stuff that people do a lot of dream work on. But it is totally normal to have worries and fears about death and dying. That is one of kind of the things that, kind of like one of the later doorways or initiations that people go through in spiritual practice, is to resolve that fear of death. And that comes through, that could be a whole nother video, but it comes through acceptance and being comfortable with the unknown, and letting go of control on a bunch of different levels. I would also share, though, that living can tend to be quite a struggle, and so you can get to a point where you can recognize that you have had many difficult changes and experiences in your life, many different doorways that you have gone through, and the sort of ultimate doorways that we go through are birth and death. But we have plenty of doorways that we go into in between. And so I find the best way to conceptualize death is just another doorway that we go through. But there are some people that, for whatever personal trauma history, whatever experiences existentially, that they have a considerable fear of death and dying, and that expresses themselves as difficulty going into the underworld. Part of themselves is so freaked out and terrified that they won't go there. Or there can be kind of an internal struggle with sleep because, on some level, going to sleep is associated with death. We can consider it sort of a small death every time that we go to sleep. Even every time we have a nap, we are venturing into the territory of death. And so, in mentioning this, I will say that for some of you willing to work to that point, we can understand that sleep can be, a relaxing thing, that going into the underworld isn't necessarily the worst thing to experience, and experience some curiosity, and some wonder in terms of spiritual experiences, in terms of dreams, all of that sort of good stuff. But there may need to be some form of therapy or spiritual healing, or something like that, if on an existential level this sort of resonates with you, because it can really impact sleep, and there can be a great deal of conflict there on that existential level about letting go of control, letting go of the self enough to venture into that under. So I hope that's given you some interesting considerations, maybe some things that you haven't thought of before, um, and helps you along your way in some way.